Thanks to everyone for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome to everyone who's joining the webinar right now. We'll get started in just a minute. Thanks.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Our webinar today is Litigation from the Client's Perspective. I'm Dan Lear and I'm going to be your host and guide as we roll through the next 60 minutes of what we think will be a very exciting and enjoyable and even, I don't know, entertaining or informative webinar about how lawyers can help clients navigate the complex and challenging landscape of litigation. Before we begin, I just want to say a few sort of introductory remarks and also take care of a bit of housekeeping. First of all, we want to thank our co-sponsor in this event, Martindale Avo. Those folks have done a great job in helping us to get the word out about this really interesting and informative webinar, and they help a lot of lawyers to find and connect with a vast number of clients. And so we're really excited to have been partnering with them. Also, I want to encourage you to submit questions as we go through the day today, or hour, to Dan or Diana, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to answer them. In the event that we run out of time, we will be creating a blog post that answers all of the questions that we get. So, don't hesitate to submit a question for fear that it won't be answered, because we'll definitely tackle them after the fact if we don't get to them today. Finally, it's my pleasure today to introduce you to Diana Breaux. Diana is a partner at Summit Law Group in Seattle, and she helps lawyers with a wide variety of different commercial, business, and other types of litigation, including intellectual property, and a wide variety of things, which I'm sure she'll share with you. But I just wanted to share two quick things that I really like and appreciate about Diana. The first was her commitment to her dogs and her family. As we did the preparation call for this webinar, we met her dog, and I also enjoyed the fact that she periodically was shouting to her kids off screen, "Be quiet!" And that sort of showed me that she brings the litigator kind of approach to everything that she does. So that was one thing I really liked. And then second, Diana also spent a fair amount of time litigating in New York. And as a West Coast guy who tends to take things a little more casually and have kind of more of a friendly approach, I always respect someone who's worked in New York City and kind of brings that approach to everything that she does. So I'm really pleased to turn the time over to Diana, and she will in turn introduce our guest today, and then just roll right into the event. So Diana, why don't you go ahead and join us and we'll get started.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for that introduction. And thanks also for massaging the truth there. I was actually telling my kids to shut up, but I appreciate you. I appreciate your gloss on history. So I am delighted to introduce Dan Price, who's the founder and CEO of Gravity Payments. And a little bit about Dan. First, as some of you may know already, he actually started Gravity when he was but a teenager, and then came really to national acclaim, fame, in fact, when in 2015, he made the incredibly bold decision to guarantee a minimum wage of $70,000 a year for his team of 120 employees at Gravity. And with that, I would like to bring Dan on so we can get right to this. I think you're going to have a great time hearing from Dan today. I know I have really enjoyed our conversations. Thanks. Hi, Dan.
I have too. I'm really pleased to be with you today.
Well, tell us a little bit about Gravity's origin story. How did it come about?
Well, I grew up the fourth of six kids in rural Idaho, listening to Rush Limbaugh for 3 hours a day, and also studying the Bible for 1 to 3 hours a day, including 1 hour out loud every morning. And so I went to school for the first time at 12, and I started a rock band because I was like socially awkward and, you know, like needed something to do. And then through my rock band, I met all these small businesses, and some of the small business owners, including Heather Hempel from Caldwell Moxie Java, Idaho, who gave us a venue to play at. She was explaining to me all of these predatory practices that she, as a small business owner, was subjected to, including, in her mind, the most egregious one, which was credit card processing. So I just jumped in. I was a junior in high school at that time, and I helped her renegotiate her credit card processing. She introduced me to some friends of hers that own small businesses, and built up a small practice of a couple hundred clients while I was building my product, my junior and senior of high school. And then officially launched out of my dorm room my freshman year at Seattle Pacific University. And I've been doing it ever since, so pretty much full time.
And so you started with the Moxie Java. How many customers do you guys have today?
We have 20,000 customers now, mostly spread throughout the US, a little bit international too.
And so to get to the topic we're here to discuss today, what kind of situations have you found yourself in for which you've had to hire counsel during your tenure?
Well, about maybe 6 months into my freshman year, I was pretty desperate because we had a competitor sue us when we had just started, and we had basically no money. And I had no, I'm from Idaho. I didn't know what lawyers were. Like, I didn't know what they do. I didn't know what a litigator was. Like, I probably literally didn't know the definition of that. And so I ended up somehow getting a hold of Paul Dayton, who, you know, we hired. And again, this is like 15 years ago. And it was a pretty silly lawsuit, pretty flimsy. So we kind of, you know, got it dismissed and everything. But, you know, it was a quick introduction, and Paul did something really nice for me that I'll never forget, which is he let me pay him over a year because, you know, there was like a whatever $15,000 bill that literally was like more money than I had in the bank account. So. And
what was it like hiring a lawyer for the first time? I mean, you were a baby, essentially.
Yeah, I was probably 19 or 20. It was intimidating. It was scary. You know, it was like a situation where like every second that clicks on the clock, like I'm thinking about like, what's the math on how much that second just cost? And on the other hand, I'm realizing how helpless I am because this other company that has the money to have lawyers without thinking that way, basically has me in a bit of a full Nelson without really any real merit to it.
And one of the things that I've enjoyed learning about you is how involved in decision making you like to be when it comes to litigation. Did it start out that way when you hired a lawyer for the first time 15 years ago in this dispute? Were you as involved back then?
I really didn't know what was going on, so I don't think so. I think it helped me to be more involved, though, I think, because I was so young and I like was so kind of over my skis. We all know that feeling of being over our skis, and it's very motivating to learn and to like dive in. And so I just, kind of felt like, well, if I'm going to spend all this money on this thing that I didn't plan for, I better get a lesson and learn something out of it that'll help me going forward.
So having taken your company from those infant days to where you are now, looking back, any advice for law firms on how we can make ourselves more accessible to emerging companies and kind of speak the language of a startup company?
It's really tough, right? Because there are like two different worlds, and for me, it was like I just didn't know anybody. So the more I think that you can just be out there like with the message of like how the legal system works in really basic terms, how litigation works and the different kind of specialties like within, like obviously there's a wide gap between, like a corporate contract lawyer or commercial contract lawyer and a commercial litigator. And so just continuing to like spread the message of like how it all works and give people those puzzle pieces so that they can put them together.
So I'd like to fast forward to your big litigation you had. It was against your co-founder, who happens to also be your brother, and it was a pretty gnarly litigation that could have. So why don't you talk to us about what was at stake for you personally and the company, and what that experience was like?
Yeah, so a little bit more context there. So when I was 17 doing my thing in Idaho, my brother was also kind of working in the same industry in a corporate office environment down in California. And we ended up both being in Seattle. And so it made a lot of sense to kind of join our forces and, specialize in our different roles with our different strengths. And at the time, we had very compatible goals because he was looking for freedom over his time, economic freedom. And I was looking to build relationships and help all these small business owners. And that was pretty much what I liked. So he could get what he wanted out of the business. I could get what I wanted out of the business. And there weren't really any conflicts. But once the business became more successful financially, and there was potentially decisions to make that would make us far more financially successful versus far more dedicated to our clients and our team and those things, that's where those conflicts started to emerge. And then also, of course, for me going through kind of like, let's be honest, my adolescence with, with having, 20, 30, 40, 50 employees, going through the 2008 recession where, I'm thinking like, wow, like this is all great because I love helping all these small businesses. And then all of a sudden we're going to be out of business in 6 or 7 months. We had to like dodge, 3 major potential existential crises to get through that. And so with all that, of course, we're both, people who are having some egos and those things and some sibling rivalries. And so we started to have a bit of a fraying in our relationship. But Lucas, he was less invested in the company in some ways than I was. And so he and I talked about it, and he ended up leaving the company, taking a step back. And that brought a lot of harmony to our relationship because all of a sudden we weren't, like working toe to toe together every day. And we had a lot of space and opportunity just to be friends. And he started scuba diving, kind of became, I guess, semi-retired, traveled the world for many years to all these far-flung places that I couldn't even pronounce.
While you're running the business.
Yeah. And we had negotiated a separation kind of agreement whereby I would become the majority owner of the company. He would get an immediate $400,000 cash payout. Well, actually, I should say that was paid off over some time, maybe a year or two. And then we would guarantee him, kind of a workable income, something in the realm of, I don't remember the exact amount when you added up all the components, but between $50,000 and $100,000 in addition to that kind of like cash payment, and have that through things like dividends, part-time salary, all those things. And then on my end, there was kind of two unusual things. One was I had a huge amount of latitude and freedom to run the business however I wanted to, more so than what would be typical in these sorts of agreements.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there was an unusual term that went with that, which was all of my commercial endeavors had to be through this partnership so that Lucas could always have his percentage, his minority percentage of anything that I did, including things like speaking or writing or anything. And so it was kind of unusual in those two ways. And as brothers in our 20s, we felt like that was fair at the time.
And so, did you have any notice that he was going to sue you? Like, how did the lawsuit come about?
Yeah, so we had a real deterioration of our relationship where we weren't communicating a ton, and so I was kind of like a little bit like on edge and concerned that there could be a dispute. But then there wasn't a whole lot in terms of indication. But, I hate to even say that because I want to like zoom out and say, when you're not really like communicating or talking to somebody that's your business partner for a couple of years, like maybe that is a bit of notice in some ways.
And so eventually you got served with a complaint, and what went through your head?
I don't know. I mean, it was kind of like I could kind of like have like two things going through my head at the same time that seemed to contradict each other, which was like a confusing moment, right? So I was probably a bit overwhelmed, but there was part of me that really thought, well, this is third-party adjudication. We haven't been getting along or seeing eye to eye for a long time. And the idea that we can have third-party adjudication so that we can move forward, maybe that's actually a good thing. But then there's that whole kind of like moment of like, just anytime you get sued, it doesn't feel great. And so I kind of was holding both of those feelings at the same time.
And can you talk to us a little bit about what was at stake? Like if you had lost the lawsuit?
Yeah, well, I testified under oath that had I lost the lawsuit, I would lose control of the company because what the lawsuit sought in many ways, primarily, but not exclusively, was a
Diana, judging by your face, I'm concerned that Dan is frozen for you as well.
Yes, he is.
All right. Folks, just hang tight. I think that Dan will be rejoining us shortly. This is the technical challenges of our modern day.
This is the world we live in now.
That's right. Hopefully for not much longer.
I could have my dogs perform some.
Yeah, we could have the dog
entertain everyone.
Yeah, let's send Dan. I'm going to send Dan a quick note. Oh, it looks like he exited and is potentially rejoining. Diana, while we're waiting, let me ask you a quick question. So, have you ever kind of been in a situation like this, like Dan was describing, where you end up with co-founders, or more to the point, even brothers that are kind of head to head in a situation like this? How does that work from a litigator's perspective, and how do you think about that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I actually had a case this year involving family members who were fighting over a major asset. And it's hard because emotions can really complicate decision making. And, there's a common adage that it takes a crazy lawyer or a crazy client, or maybe both, for a case to go to trial. Another factor that really complicates litigation is when people just are driven by emotions, because you can't quantify the risk and the payoff when you're dealing with someone's core sense of themselves or sense of being right, and that can be really difficult to work with. So a lot of lawyers, a lot of litigators are like, I don't want to deal with family type situations, but unfortunately also with friends and co-founders who start businesses together, very often you don't anticipate like the worst case scenario. You expect that you're entering into a happy marriage and everyone's going to get along together for a long time. So one issue that I've seen with a lot of clients is when the relationship goes south, they haven't, in their documents and in their kind of agreements, they've not planned for a clean separation.
Yeah, and I think it's, I at one point, so previously I worked for the online legal marketplace Avo, and we were constantly kind of thinking about marketing ways to drive. I think Dan's going to be joining us shortly. Hey, Dan. I was just going to quickly say the notion of a prenup is very unromantic. I remember having that discussion, but it's also very necessary, I think, as Dan is about to explain, because the way that you set up those terms at the beginning have a strong and significant impact on the way things ultimately play out. But Dan, we were just doing a little tap dancing while you were coming back. So if you recall where you were, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Yeah, maybe Diana, you can help me where you'd like me to pick up. But yeah, I apologize. My internet at my house went out, so we're streaming off my phone. I hope it goes well.
Fantastic. Well, we were in the lawsuit, and I think it'd be really helpful to hear about how you navigate it. I mean, litigation is inherently risky and time consuming and expensive. And how did you navigate what ended up being a company where, a litigation, as you said, that could have been the end of the company? How did you navigate that?
Well, there was so much at stake for me personally and professionally, and I can't overstate how much was at stake personally in a way, not necessarily through the litigation, but just in the overall kind of facts that led to the litigation. Because, this is my brother, one of my best friends, and, we're a close-knit family. So having a conflict didn't even just hurt us. It hurts everybody in our family. It hurts our nieces and nephews. It hurts our siblings. It hurts our parents. So that pressure, that weight was on me. And then also, this company I'm thinking about, at the time, the 120 or so families that are supported by the company. And hopefully, most importantly, the difference we're making to all those small businesses. If we kind of flip the switch and start doing business as usual, like our competitors do, we could double or triple our margins in some ways. We could squeeze our customers, we could squeeze our employees, and that would have a negative effect on them, but a positive effect in terms of our bottom line, the financial resources that we have for owners. And so it was overwhelming, and I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what I all did to try to manage it, but it was a bit disorienting. It was a bit overwhelming. And then all of a sudden trying to get up to speed on all the legal process and procedure that I was signing up for, that was a difficult combination.
Looking back now, what do you wish you'd known when you embarked on that journey that you kind of only figured out after the fact?
Well, a pretty well-known lawyer in Seattle who was mediating for us, Lou Peterson, he was telling me a little bit about how in mediation, he was telling all of us in his opening remarks to all the parties that, we might feel like we were, 6 or 9 months into a 12 or 15-month process, but we were actually, maybe 9 months into a multiple year process. In terms of, the appellate courts, potentially Supreme Court appeals, those sorts of things. And I think, just knowing all of those like details, all of those simple like X's and O's that you and other experienced litigators just kind of take for granted. As a client, it was sometimes hard to pick up all of that. And as much as I'm sure my lawyers did a great job, wanting to make sure I was fully informed. It's a lot of info to digest. And some of those details just didn't connect with me until much later.
Any advice for us lawyers who have to kind of explain all this? And as we've talked about, you called out to me that I don't even at this point know what I know, because it's through experience. So any advice on how we can better prepare clients for that long road of a litigation?
Yeah, you have what some people call the curse of knowledge. You've learned so much, you have so much experience that there's so many things that you've learned, you forgot that you learned them, and you forgot what it was like to not know them. And so just being very simple and clear and walking through people, everything, all the very basics in very slow, clear detail. I know that can be, difficult because it's a fast-paced job, and you all are used to operating at a high level in a really fast-paced kind of atmosphere. But I think really slowing down and making it very, very clear and simple, and even repeating yourself multiple times, starting a meeting and just reminding your client over and over again of those basics is such a grounding moment. And as a client, the level of trust that you can have in your counsel when they're willing to slow things down for you and come to your level and walk you through it. And I believe even being repetitive is merited in this situation, because as a client, it's a lot to absorb very quickly. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 shots to really get it.
One thing that comes up a lot is clients want to know, like, what's our likelihood of success? And they always want us to kind of quantify that, which is incredibly hard to do because there's always so much uncertainty. And in a litigation, jurors can be crazy. Judges don't always do what you think they're going to do. And one thing, when I work with people like yourself who are just so devoted to the cause, it can be really hard to explain that we might lose. And sometimes I think even when I'm like, hold on, it's hard to shift gears, right? Because I'm with you in the trenches and I believe in our case, but then you have to step back and say, we could lose. Was there a moment during trial when the reality that you might lose this case and what that meant, when it became sort of real to you?
It happened far before trial when I thought about that. And there was an irony to what would happen for me personally if I lost that I think is unusual, which is I think I would have been forced to sell the whole company if I lost, because the judgment would be such a huge sum for a company that's doesn't have much of a prayer to cover that amount of money. And so, but if I did sell the whole company, and if somebody were to accept their appraisal at face value of, a company that's nearing $100 million valuation, well, I own 65% of that company. And so the irony is, had I lost, I probably would have been able to pocket whatever $65 million would have turned into after taxes. And I had gone around my whole life, at that point, 14 years, building the business, making all these promises to people, making promises to our customers and employees about decisions that I would make in the future. But all of a sudden, if I have this, court-imposed reason why I would have to sell the company, it was ironic because it would have caused me to be, wealthy beyond my wildest dreams as a 30-year-old or 31-year-old, and have complete freedom with no moral responsibility or guilt for putting myself into that situation. And so I had kind of an unusual situation where I believe the best thing for me would have been to lose in some ways if I'm looking at it from a pure kind of economically selfish motivation period of time. Because if you have a 30-year-old who just got a $100 million sale and has 65, whatever after taxes, $45 million in the bank, and is in the tech and payments world, that's pretty much the best starting point anybody could ever dream of. But it wouldn't be the best thing for our employees, and it for sure would not be the best thing for our customers, because the competitors that would buy our company to get to pay that $100 million valuation, they'd have to readjust the pricing, which is double what we charge, our competitors do. And they would have to, over time, slowly, eat away at the employee base and consolidate into their employee base, where they're maybe used to paying $5,000 or $6,000 overseas, or $25,000 or $30,000 or $35,000. We're paying that same person $90,000 a year. So they would have a huge opportunity to turn their $100 million investment into $250 or $300 or $500 million. I would all of a sudden have somebody who would pay me, kind of front run me for that amount, and then I would bear no responsibility for the consequences. So it was a very unusual situation where losing in some ways would be the best outcome for me.
So obviously you've not chosen profits over your employees. And that's a story that it's a bit of a segue now, but talk to us about how you made that bold decision and how it's affected the culture of your company and your values.
Well, I love my job, and I feel like having a great job that you love, and we all know that the people around us is probably the number one thing that causes us to love our job. That's so valuable. And I think sometimes we do undervalue it because we're marketed that our jobs are meant for extrinsic value, meaning we value what we get out of doing the work as opposed to actually going to work every day, valuing it that way. And so I thought about kind of like how more money for me wouldn't make me happier. And that seemed to be the case. I was making $1 million a year of compensation, and I was, saving a lot for a rainy day in case something happened to the company. And I was putting all that money, most of it, into savings. And I just realized that it would be, even just selfishly, better for me to be in an environment where I was not making more money than everybody else, but where everybody was well taken care of. And it was just the kind of obvious right thing to do, because clearly the people at Gravity that were building the company, they were building the value. And just because the system basically said that I could capture a huge share of that value, that didn't necessarily mean it was the right thing to do. And just one anecdote that I think proves it, there's an employee at Gravity who's been there she's in her 15th year, I believe. Her name's Rosita Barlow. And she had to take a second job at nighttime at McDonald's to afford to work at Gravity. And when I found that out, it was heartbreaking for me because she was, she's just the best person you could ever ask for to work with. So, productive and positive and just like so dedicated to our clients. And so it was pretty clear that I was on the wrong track. But on the other hand, I was getting an education from other CEOs from organizations like Entrepreneurs Organization, YPO, Young Presidents Organization, a lot of reading I was doing that talked about employees as a cost to be minimized and managed, especially in a situation like a 2008 crisis, especially in a scarcity situation. And so I had to undo that programming of, we have to look at this job, do a competitive analysis of the market rate, and then let the manager determine kind of on a bell curve where each employee is going to fit. And we had to just say, no, we're a team. So just because we can get away with paying this little amount, unfortunately, if you take my $1 million compensation at the time, plus the $2 million in profit we were making, that's $3 million total. And this program was going to cost us about $3 million a year to implement. And so that's where some of the risk came in, where we had to take all of our profit and all of my compensation to make it work.
I think that sets the stage well for, that's what you were fighting for in the litigation, is to be able to continue to keep the company for your employees. And one thing is, as a litigator, I get to work 24/7 on the litigation and be planning the strategy. But while you were involved in this litigation, you were also running a company. How can we lawyers better respect your need to both be involved in the decision-making in a litigation and also respect the fact that you're also running a business?
Well, I think just being upfront about that conversation, because I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. And I think even knowing what you're willing and open to doing and how you're open to handling it and not being upfront about that, because I do know lawyers who want to kind of be trusted to run the show and let the client know when they need them. And I also know lawyers who are willing to let the client be very involved and call a lot of the shots, you know, kind of like in the day to day. And so just being upfront with your client about, you know, your range, what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, so that it's a fit with what they're looking for. And if you happen to have a client like me who, you know, sees a real need to fight and be very involved directly, you know, just making sure that you're okay with the downsides of that and having those conversations up front. Because obviously the downsides are it's going to be a lot more communication. There's going to be somebody that's scrutinizing your work, and you know, that can take away from your effectiveness, or if you think it will, that's not the right fit for you. In my case, the team that I was working with, you know, we had I would say a creative tension about us as a team that like led to, I think, all of us doing better and performing well when we really needed to.
Talk to us a little bit about what it was like going to trial ultimately, and, you know, testifying under oath and leaving it to a judge to decide whether your brother's allegations, you know, that you were mismanaging the company had merit. Well,
it's nerve-wracking because you know that there's no guarantees. Also, the firm that was handling the lawsuit against me, McNall Ebel, they're a firm that has a reputation of being really good and really tough amongst my friends and other entrepreneurs. And a lot of people were specifically concerned that, you know, that like they are creative and have certain capabilities. And I had to keep reminding myself that like the facts really matter. And, you know, the history really matters. The record really matters. And I had to keep directing myself to go to those issues. And kind of ironically, I think I was psyching myself out a little bit at the time and thinking too much about the lawyers as opposed to, you know, what, you know, really I hoped would turn out to matter, which would be the facts and the record.
Sometimes it's hard for me to convince clients to just trust in the process, because it's a long game and you kind of like want to react minute to minute. And was it easy for you to kind of just sit back and let things happen and have the long view, or did you get impatient and frustrated?
It was hard. And one thing that made it harder was we lost the majority of pretrial motions. Which I know is not necessarily an indication of, you know, like where the ultimate decision will be, because each one stands on their own and a lot of them are procedural. But it is kind of a kick in the gut in the way that you're saying when you do lose a lot of pretrial motions, you know, both ones that we filed and ones that they filed. And it's not that we lost all of them, but it's nerve-wracking. And you say trust in the process, but then at the same time you say, you know, can't make any guarantees, and best case scenario, you know, you never get to 100% guarantee. And so, you know, it's a combination that makes sense, but it's still difficult to incorporate that as a client.
And by the way, you're going to have to pay for our services regardless of the outcome.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So
I'll say too that the team that was representing me, Paul Dayton, Anne-Marie Sargent, other folks at their firms, they had a very high standard for being officers of the court and seeing themselves first and foremost as officers of the court. And there's a benefit to me as a client of that, because of obviously the credibility that they have with the court is really fantastic. But sometimes when you feel like the other sets of attorneys are willing to be a little bit more aggressive than your attorneys are, you know, that's a strength in a lot of ways, but, you know, it doesn't always feel good in the moment.
Yeah. What do you look for? Like, is it a gut gut check, or I mean, how do you choose lawyers?
I mean, I think that credibility, I don't know that I would have had a good answer to this before going through such a difficult and long litigation process. But after going through that, I do think credibility is just so key. And I remember one particular expert, for example, which isn't quite like a lawyer, who, she had a very strong opinion about, kind of like what the truth was after her investigation. And obviously she has a level of objectivity in it. And the fact that she was like wanting to stick with her guns, that she was not coachable, that she was not signaling any type of openness to be coached. I like that because I thought, wow, this person's going to have a lot of credibility if they're sticking up to me, in private. Then, when they're in front of the court, the court will know that they can be trusted. And so I think it's the same thing with the lawyer. Again, even though I recognize that it can be painful at times, I want to have a lawyer who will be honest with me, who will be upfront with me, but I'm also okay with a lawyer who knows when to say no and knows when to remind me that they really first and foremost are an officer of the court.
So the legal profession has not really evolved much in terms of how we bill and the law firm model. My firm and its founding had a kind of bold idea, maybe not as bold as $70,000 minimum wage, but we have a value adjustment line on our bills. So clients, can adjust if they think that the bill doesn't respect the value they got. I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any bold ideas for our profession and how we could do things better?
Well, I love that idea. So first of all, let me say that before I answer your question. I think that's really innovative and really cool. And I think it's really cool that you and your partners at Summit are doing that. And I hope other people will not only consider that idea, but come up with their own ideas, because I think diversity and a competition of ideas is good in every arena, including in litigation. My basic thought about the legal profession is similar to my thought about many other professions, which is, there's a lot of us out there, there's a lot of you all out there that are doing great work, but we're also part of a system that has incentives aligned to having alignment with those who are wealthy and powerful, those who can pay big bills without thinking about it, those who aren't going to mark down the bill necessarily, and the wealthiest clients, they're willing to and able to pay more. And that's, in my mind, a structural issue. And at Gravity Legal, we have a podcast we do called Financially Legal. And we had a guest recently on who's a civil rights attorney, litigator from California. And she talked about how we really have two justice systems. We have the civil system for the wealthy and the corporations. And then we have the criminal system, which everybody else relies on, which is, in many ways worse for people on both sides of the equation. And so, our goal at Gravity is to lower the bar for needing to have how much money, how many lawyers do you need to have to be independent? Because we think the more diversity that's out there, the more that we collectively can rebel against those incentive systems and have a more fair system, more fair access. And so we spend, tens of thousands of dollars every month developing software, developing solutions for small independent law firms. And we want those law firms to be able to stay small, to be able to stay independent, to reach a level of financial success that allows more and more of those firms to make decisions like what you made, and allow firms to make decisions that aren't purely financially motivated, and especially not short-term financially motivated. So I guess it's a long way of saying I just want to have more people like you doing more things like what you're doing and be a part of that.
Fantastic. How have you ever given thought to like a law firm's values or like their pro bono work? I mean, we all want to believe that the pro bono work and the initiatives we take as lawyers to, become diverse and help out our community and the boards we serve on, that matters for our clients. Is that something that resonates with you or that matters to you?
It absolutely does, but I do also see a little bit of downside to it. So I think it's the right thing to do. I'm so happy when people do that and it's inspiring. But I also think it does in some ways kind of excuse and perpetuate our current system of justice, which provides very little justice to the majority of people out there, in my opinion. And so I do think that, like, when we make those individual acts, and I would give myself the same critique from the $70,000 minimum wage, when we make those individual acts, we do allow to some degree the system to perpetuate, because, you know, we do take care of some of the ills of the system. And the reality is, we need to, when we make those individual commitments and sacrifices, I think we need to take that opportunity to shine the light on the need for systemic reform, and not let that be an excuse and let other people use our positive actions to perpetuate a system that has some of those injustices in it. And so I love those bold actions, but I think with it, I would encourage all of us to really think about the system and how we reform the system, and how we use actions to point the way to reform rather than point the opposite way.
That's such a compelling point. So what kind of systemic reforms do you see are needed for your industry and from your vantage point as a CEO?
Well, as for my industry and as a CEO, basically there's massive consolidation, layoffs, and more monopolistic practices happening. And there's two prongs of it. There's wealthy startups like Stripe and Square who tell their investors in code that they're building monopolies and that they can ratchet up the price when they want to. And Square recently did it. And they can hire very few employees and therefore have very little expense. And then on the other side of the industry, you have all the big legacy players, which are combining and kind of getting married to each other as a way of laying off more employees and reducing choices for small businesses. But that also changes the landscape, because a company like ours has a very hard time keeping up with some of these larger companies in terms of how much we can expend. And there's a pretty famous CEO in our industry who's just famous for suing everybody just for fun, because he has plenty of money to do it. And he sues his competitors all the time as just a business strategy. Unfortunately, I got into his crosshairs, but we didn't have any kind of relationship or basis for him to sue me. And so he hired a stalker to basically harass me and my family for 2.5 years. And when I went to the legal system and said, can I get this stopped? You know, it was very difficult because First Amendment, those sorts of things. And so it just seems like the level of access that people get is very different, my access versus his access. And I recognize that my access is 1,000 times better than what it was, you know, when I was just getting started and got sued. And so those are the type of systemic issues that I see. And I think pro bono is nice in that it solves for certain problems there. But I think in my case, you know, somebody who's early and does not have all the wealth and wherewithal and sophistication to keep up with these big companies, I think we need to have a more fair system that does not tilt so much toward the wealthy.
We got a couple questions from when people registered. They had some questions that they wanted to ask. I'm going to turn to some of those now. Okay, this one, how did your employee turnover change after you instituted the $70,000 minimum wage?
It got cut in half.
And has that continued?
It has continued. Now, okay, I'll give you a little wrinkle though that I think you'll find fascinating, which was our employee happiness score had been steady around 8.0 prior to the $70,000 announcement. It went up to 9.1, which I thought was impossible afterwards. But over the next 3 months, it went back to 8.0. And so there's something called the Hedonic Treadmill, which basically means people's lives can improve, but then, you know, it's like, what have you done for me lately kind of thing. And
Sure.
some people think, well, that's kind of defeats the point of why you did it, but you see why we did it in the turnover, cut our turnover in half. That's a good thing. And then employees' lives improved drastically. We went from 0 to 2 babies born per year total amongst the staff to we've had 55 in the last 5 years. We had a doubling of people saving for retirement. 70% of people paid down debt. And we also had a 10x housing boom of people buying first-time homes in the company. And so, when you add all that up, that's a lot less stress for them to deal with. That's more, focused time and mental health resources that can be spent having a better life and being productive at work.
So we're speaking to each other through Zoom right now because of a global pandemic, amidst, any other gifts that 2020 has wrought. How have you navigated these kind of challenging waters? And what are you guys doing to support your workers during this time?
Well, after 2008, we lost 20% of our revenue, and we were told that would be the worst recession of our lifetime. So we almost went out of business in 2008. So we decided we're just going to plan on worst case scenario every year so we can always make it. So we planned on going into 2020. We had a big meeting, and we said we're prepared for 20% down because that's the worst it's ever been, and we're told that's the worst it's ever going to be, and we all agreed to it as a company. We lost 55% of our revenue in March of 2020. And all of a sudden, instead of having like a year runway at like a 20% drop, which is what we were planning for, we had all of a sudden like a 3-month runway. We were losing up to $1.5 million a month. And we figured we had 3 or 4 months to survive. And our employees came together with an idea that, to be honest, I didn't think would work. They said, let's just have voluntary action across the board. Let's see if we can spur innovation, have apps that will help companies with social distancing, get these small businesses reopened through our technology and through helping them every way we can. We had a team that came together and said, we'll do PPP loan advisement for free, just whatever we can do to get Main Street reopened. If we can do that, then we'll survive. And if we can't, we probably don't really deserve to. And so we just tried to play our part. But what really blew me away was 98% of the employees on an anonymous, voluntary basis, anonymous so no one would know and there'd be no pressure, asked to take voluntary individual temporary pay cuts without any specific promise for repayment. And they averaged 30%. And that was we were able to, by doing that, extend our runway from that 3 or 4 months back to 12. We were able to recover because of the hard work that they put in. And then, of course, it was a bit late, but we got the PPP loan as well. So that helped. And we've been able to navigate. I can say right now that I'm confident we're going to survive. I don't know about make money, but survive. And that feels like the home run of all home runs. And I owe it to the team and our small business customers.
So did you have to do layoffs?
We didn't. And that was a big thing because when it was clear our revenue was going to drop, we were down like 30% and falling fast, day after day. So I just got the whole company together. I said, best case scenario, it's going to be 50% down. And the only way we can survive that I can think of are layoffs or price increases to our small business clients, which a lot of our competitors, including Square and Heartland, were doing, 2 of our top competitors. And so we had cover to do one or the other. And then our competitor Toast had laid off 50% of their employees, half of their employees. And so these facts were somewhat known to us, and we got together as a company. And that's when the employees came up with those ideas but the upshot of that was we were able to avoid laying off a single person because we didn't want anybody losing their financial security, their stability, and most importantly, in some ways, their health insurance at the beginning of a pandemic or any point.
Some other questions from our participants. Can you share some characteristics and skills that your lawyers exhibited that made you feel confident that you had the right lawyer?
Well, it was a nice combo in terms of the whole team that we had. But the team was led by Paul Dayton, who, as I said, he's kind of an unwavering personality. You can come at him from any different direction, and he's always going to be Paul. And I think that not only did I like that, I thought that the court would be able to trust in that, because I couldn't do anything to get him thrown off course. Even at times when I felt like it was merited for him to like be a little more flexible, he was always Paul. But that left a little bit to be desired. And so so that's where Anne Marie Sargent from Connor Sargent really helped me, because she could kind of maybe like sit down with me and really like talk me through things in a way that was a little bit more approachable for me and at a pace that I could absorb. And then also just kind of strictly from like a presentation style, you know, Paul again is, you know, has his own specific style. And but then I had Anne Marie, who she has a lot more ability to be flexible and to adapt to like what the situation is calling for. And so, and again, you know, the highest integrity, which is, I think, always the most important thing. And then, of course, you know, Brian from Paul's firm and a few other people that helped out. So it was really kind of always a team effort. But, you know, that first lawyer that I started with, you know, when I was 19, Paul, you know, he was still the guy with me. And there was something about like just having a relationship that, you know, was that long for me that was comforting and helpful. But at times, you know, a bit maddening, because of course we would butt heads like anybody would under a circumstance like that.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship matters so much because you know how to communicate and kind of how to work through things. So this is an interesting question. I actually look forward to hearing your answer to this one. So how did you navigate making decisions based on emotion as opposed to business judgment? And was there a thought process that you kind of trained yourself to go through when you were making decisions about this litigation?
I've read a lot of kind of nerdy happiness books, like Sean Acor's The Happiness Advantage. The Dalai Lama wrote with the psychologist, The Art of Happiness. And they talk a lot about perspective. They talk about zooming out, seeing your situation. So, you know, I was able to, I think, just remember that I was not a victim. Even though I was being dragged into court, I was being, you know, forced to spend, you know, an ungodly amount of time and, you know, like $2 million in legal fees, you know, like coming up with literally, I think it was like 600,000 like discrete documents that I had to produce, you know, just really a horrific situation. But I was able to zoom out and be like, you got to start a business with your brother. Most people don't get to do that. You two had a really phenomenal working relationship for a short period of time, but you accomplished a lot together during that time. And now that you don't agree, you get third-party adjudication, so you don't have to go duel each other. And so I just remind myself of like, you know, what other time and place would be better to be born, or situation could I ask for? And I just tried to remember how privileged and lucky I was, and how pretty much anybody out there in human history that's ever lived has had it worse than I have. And so the idea that I have to go through this really intense scrutiny with a big budget that's meant to tear me down and pull me apart, that kept me thinking rationally in that situation.
Well, I think I'm going to buy all my clients' Dalai Lama books for the holiday gifts. So that was really, there was a light bulb going off for me. That was really, thank you for sharing that.
And I'll just say this too, and Dan, I know you're going to jump in.
Dan's going to jump in.
Just 5 minutes, guys. So probably 1 or 2 more questions, and I'll jump in at the end. But as you were.
Oh, okay, great.
So you kind of meditated yourself to peace with the process.
Well, and I believe in that, but I think even just being extremely practical and saying, okay, if you're going to, you know, start a business as a kid, and you're going to start with your brother. I mean, one of my friends, Julie Sandler, who's co-founder of Pioneer Square Venture Group. I'm getting the name slightly wrong, but she gave me a book, or recommended a book called The Founder's Dilemma. And it went through statistics, and like co-founders, like 50-50 co-founders end up in litigation like 30% of the time. And if they're siblings or related, you know, you can double that. And I went through all these statistics, and it's like, actually, I hate to say this, but the outcome that we had is not uncommon. And we feel it's uncommon because I'm like, me and my brother. So just getting that practical perspective of knowing this actual data and then trying to adjust my expectations, not through any sort of like meditation or spirituality, but just through accepting truth and accepting reality, statistical reality, and then adjusting my expectations as a client, as a litigant to those realities, and then to understand that people come after it. And so I'm sure we're going to give people a bit of a cliffhanger, which they can read, you know, the judge's ruling. They can read, you know, the ruling of the Court of Appeals on it and all that. But, you know, there's life afterwards. And Lucas and I continue to share some very close friends who tell me that he's doing wonderful and very happy and thriving. You know, I feel like I'm trying to do my best to be able to say the same thing. And so to understand that even though you go through this awful thing that no one would want to go through, at the end of the day, I have unconditional love for my brother, and I just want the best for him. And if we can have a relationship, I hope we can. But if we can't, I just want us both to be happy and healthy and have life continue to go on and thrive.
So we don't need to make it a cliffhanger. You won and a trial, and then it was affirmed on appeal. And can you describe the sense of vindication you felt, or how it felt to read the judge kind of rule on in particular the appellate decision, that they kind of went your way on everything?
So I got to do a little plug. I wrote about it. This book.
And answer that question in 30 seconds, Dan.
Yeah, in this book called Worth It. But there was a moment where I found out. I was on the couch and I found out, and I started crying. And I didn't know why I was crying. Was it relief? Was it everything finally like realizing that it was going to be over? And I think that played into it. But I really felt sad for my brother. You know, he had been through so much. We both had. He had initiated the litigation. I had no desire to countersue, even when people brought up that idea. But at the end of the day, that would be a really tough, sad, difficult thing to experience. So my thoughts were with my brother, and I just let the tears flow and just tried to, instead of thinking it, I tried to feel it. And I think as a lawyer, you know, you're going to be thinking it, right? Because that's your job. And so I took that opportunity to really be able to just feel it all. And to be honest, Diana, I couldn't do it justice with words, the type of feelings that I had.
I believe that.
So,
but I tried really hard.
And you can read all about it. Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. Diana and Dan, thank you so much. This was great. I was really enjoying everything that you had to share. So thank you all. Just one quick note on the way out. I failed to mention at the beginning that I am head up marketing and partnerships for Gravity Legal, which is a service like Gravity Payments designed specifically to help lawyers and law firms navigate the landscape of getting paid. So folks, you can find us at gravity-legal.com. And Dan did us the great favor of shouting out the Financially Legal podcast, which I shared a link to the podcast episode he mentioned. But you can find all of that content at gravity-legal.com/financiallylegal. Otherwise, thank you again to Dan and Diana. Thank you to the folks at Martindale Avo. Thanks to all of you. There will be a video of this made available, so you can catch up on this later, and we'll take all of the questions that we didn't answer and put those in a forthcoming blog post. So thank you all again. It was lovely, and we'll see you all soon.
Diana, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Bye.